that is. In the late 60s, there was a race to sail around the world in a sailboat alone without any help and without stopping. And I looked, it appears as if that's still something that's kind of going on even today, or at least in recent history. But it was called the Golden Globe Race, and there was a prize with money and a trophy. You got the honor and the respect of all kinds of people. And one reason that some entered the race was for that honor and that prestige. Others wanted to do it for the money. In fact, one man tried to cheat so he could get the honor and the glory and the money and all that kind of stuff. He tried to forge his documents and all that kind of stuff. He was motivated by the praises of others. He was motivated to cheat to get the praises of others. It failed, but so he tried. The man who actually was going to win, he was in the lead, he was all set to win. He sent a note over to a passing ship. Said this, he said, "I'm done with this." He said, "I love being on the water and sailing, but all the popularity and the money is not why I'm doing this. Not why I'm doing this." He was sailing and trying to go around the world in a sailboat because he loved it. See, he was motivated by the challenge. He was motivated by the love of sailing. That was his motivation. And all the other issues got to be too much for him. So he dropped out. He dropped out. See, the fact is, we all have different motivations for why we do what we do, don't we? We have all different motivations. I can remember when I was a kid, I was motivated to brush my teeth because I didn't want to get a spanking. Yeah, I'm happy to announce that I am no longer motivated by spankings anymore. See, my mother lives up in Massachusetts, so she can't do it. She has to take a flight down here or something. But I'm no longer motivated by the spankings. But motivation for all kinds of things, right? In the first century, there were different teachers, there were different preachers, there were different philosophers who would go around, and they all had different motives. Many of them were motivated from money, and they would roam place to place, and they wanted to get cash from people is what they wanted, or they were happy to get popularity. Thankfully, there's nobody who goes around peddling religion or anything like that today, right? For money. Right, that's all gone away, right? Yeah. Buy my 12 set DVDs for the remarkable price of 6 payments of $49.99. Easy payments, that kind of thing. Yeah. People are still motivated. Well, in the first century, they had that as a motivation. And listen, even the Apostle Paul was motivated when he went around preaching the gospel. Paul's motivation was different, though. His motivation was different from what all these other people were doing. He wanted to please God. His whole motivation in life was, I want to please God. I don't care about the money. I don't care about the popularity. I want to please God. Look at the text with me. 1 Thessalonians chapter 2, verses 1 through 8. The text that was read for us. It's okay. Let's look at it again. He says this. 1 Thessalonians chapter 2, verses 1 through 8, he says, "For you yourselves know, brothers, that our coming to you was not in vain. Though we had already suffered and been shamefully treated at Philippi, as you know, we had boldness in our God to declare to you the gospel of God in the midst of much conflict. For our appeal does not spring from error or impurity or any attempt to deceive, but just as we have been approved by God to be entrusted with the gospel, so we speak, not to please man, but to please God who tests our hearts. For we never came with words of flattery, as you know, nor with a pretext for greed. God is witness. Nor did we seek glory from people, whether from you or from others, though we could have made demands as apostles of Christ. But we were gentle among you, like a nursing mother taking care of her own children. So, being affectionately desirous of you. We were ready to share with you not only the gospel of God, but also ourselves, because you had become very dear to us. See, Paul makes it clear. He makes it clear that while some might have seen his mission as empty or void, powerless of any impact, it wasn't in vain. It wasn't empty or powerless. That's the word vain. It wasn't empty. It wasn't powerless. Why? Because it pleased God. See, here's the truth. Here's the truth I think that you and I need to get a hold of. Here's the truth we need to take on and really get a hold of. Nothing that pleases God is empty or void, regardless of what it might look like to the outsiders. Nothing that pleases God is empty or void. The small child says a little prayer up to God before they go to bed at night. Is that empty? Is it void? Is it powerless? Oh, it's powerful. It's pleasing to God, isn't it? It's pleasing to God. Doesn't matter if we think that something is big or little. If it pleases God, it's powerful. Jesus talked about giving even a cup of cold water. A small token. Yet we do it with the right motives. We do it in God's name. It's powerful. Powerful. Even though Paul's visit and travels were shrouded in conflict and suffering and trials, some would have looked at that as void, powerless, foolish. It wasn't. It was powerful because it pleased God. Again, remember that there are people going around at this time, different religious folks, different traveling philosophers. And they were peddling all kinds of thoughts and ideas and religions and all of that. And some felt that if they were to go through any kind of trouble, if they were to go to any trouble at all, that their message was untrue, was vain, or worthless. If you went around and you had any kind of hardship peddling your message, people would look at that and say, clearly it's untrue. Otherwise, you wouldn't have these problems. Right? Otherwise, that was a common thought back then. So, what do you think most of the philosophers and peddlers of religion did? They tried to make it very pleasing, didn't they? To men, they tried to make it very pleasing. Yeah, absolutely. See, Paul's mission and his message, though, even though shrouded in all that conflict and all that suffering, wasn't worthless, was in fact the power of God. See, his sufferings and the conflicts that surrounded him were due to the fact that Paul was preaching, and his preaching was powerful. And the troubles, he goes on to say, show that his message is true. Paul's preaching, he says, in the midst of this suffering, it goes to show that it's true. That he's speaking from true motives. He's not trying to please men. He's trying to please God. And when you try to please God, as opposed to men, what happens? When you try to please God as opposed to men, what happens?
God is glorified.
Well, God is glorified, that's right. And people tend not to like it. When Paul was in Philippi, he was beaten and imprisoned. Unjustly, but he was beaten and imprisoned for preaching Christ, crucified and raised from the dead. Now, if that were us, we might think, I think the next city I go to, I'm going to change it up a little bit. How many here like to be beaten? Oh, we got to talk later, brother. We don't, right? Nobody wants to be beaten. Paul is beaten. He's imprisoned and all that. For what, though? for preaching Christ crucified and raised from the dead, right? People didn't like that. We might think, I'm going to have to change up my plan. Maybe it wasn't very effective. Maybe what I'm going to do is go into the next city and I'll talk to the politicians and I'll get them on my side. And then we'll get a little campaign going, right? And then we'll come out and maybe change the message just a little bit. Maybe instead of something like, Jesus wants you to die to yourself, Jesus wants you to take up your cross and follow him, maybe we'll say, Jesus wants you happy, healthy, prosperous. Would that sell? Oh, that would sell. Right? Maybe we might be tempted to do something like that. Paul doesn't do that. He's a glutton for punishment. He doesn't do that. He didn't change anything he did. He went in and he told people about the risen Lord. And guess what happened? The same thing happened. They rejected him. People rejected Christ, and then of course they rejected Paul's message and caused all kinds of trouble for him and the newly converted Christians. There were some Christians who were converted, but not very many. You see, the truth is, listen, if we do what Paul did and tell people the truth of Christ, then we too will be rejected. We're going to be rejected at times. If you tell people about Jesus, you can expect that at least on some occasions, you're going to be rejected. Stop talking about Jesus. Stop being a Jesus freak. All you ever want to talk about is Jesus. We don't change the message. We continue to preach Christ. See, it's not up to us to decide what the message is it? Is it your job or my job to come up with the message is? Or are we simply messengers? Do we have a message? Yeah, we have a message. It's not from us. It's from God. God gave us a message. We're merely ambassadors delivering a message. And it's the one that the world hates. What did Jesus say in John 15, 18 through 19? If the world hates you, know that it has hated me before it's hated you. If you were of the world would love you as its own. But because you are not of the world, but I chose you out of the world, therefore the world hates you. There's a saying out there, don't shoot the messenger. You've heard that before, right? Yeah, you heard that. See, because in ancient times, and not so ancient times, people would send messengers, a king, noblemen, whatever. They would have a messenger, they would have a message, they would send it to another group of people. They'd send it to another king or something like that. Sometimes it was peace treaties, sometimes it was declarations of war. It was all different kinds of things. And so they would send it out, and often the way that a treaty was rejected was by killing the messenger. That's where we get the saying, don't shoot the messenger, because that's what they did. In Japan, if you sent an ambassador to another warlord or something, and they rejected your little treaty, you got the head of your messenger back. That was a big no. No, we reject that. In the movie 300, maybe some of you saw it, it's about the war between Sparta and the Persians. There was a messenger at the beginning of the movie that was sent from King Xerxes to the Spartans. And the Spartans rejected the message. And the way they did was, they kicked the guy down a huge pit. They killed him. There we go. The answer is no. We're not doing it. That's the Christian. A messenger for Christ. And often people who reject Christ and his gospel reject us and take out their hate on us. So listen, trials, tribulations, and conflicts will come when we preach the truth. But that in no way invalidates the message. It doesn't mean that the message is vain or empty or powerless. It doesn't mean our efforts are vain or empty. Even if we never see the fruit of it. Being faithful to God and pleasing Him is never in vain. There was a movie made a number of years back. I think it was called something like At the Edge of the Spear, or The Tip of the Spear, something along those lines. It was about missionaries who went to a foreign country, went to some people who were in the jungles, had never really been contacted by outsiders, and they went in there to preach the gospel, and they killed them. They killed them. All the missionaries, they killed them. And you would think it was in vain that they went. No, it wasn't. Years later, the wives went back. And guess what? The place was converted. Their sacrifice was not in vain. Pleasing to God, powerful. See, the world sees a small group of outcasts huddled together on a Sunday morning as insignificant. Look around. What do we got? What's the number say? 69? Something like that? Can't see that far back there. Something like that. Like 69 of us. 70. Let's say 70. Let's round it up. We'll give us 70. That's small. That's not a huge group. The world looks at us and sees a small group of people huddled together on Sunday morning and thinks, weak, powerless, foolish. Look at, they're giving up their Sunday morning. How does God see it? Does God use small groups to do anything? Has He ever in history used small groups? I think there was a guy named Gideon, right? I think of a guy named Jesus, who at one point, there was a huge number of people, right, following him. Thousands of people following. At one point, there was the great church shrinkage movement because they all left. And Jesus even turned to the disciples and said, you guys going too? Why did He ask them the question? Because they were thinking about it. You guys going to go too? No, I guess not. We're going to stick with you. At the cross, there was a whole lot of people on His side, right? Oh, very, 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 very few, very few. Can God change the world with just a handful of people? Sure. What did God do in the first century with a group of people huddled together, scared because Jesus had been crucified? Well, He changed the world. Changed the world upside down. See, the world might see us. We might even see ourselves. We might even see the things that we're doing as insignificant, powerless, vain. But what is God doing? How does God see it? How does God see us? See, what we're doing is more powerful than you and I can even imagine. We take the supper. We take the supper, right? Every week we come together, we eat the supper. And someone might think, But in the midst of our eating that, what's going on? We are proclaiming. In our silence as we eat, we are proclaiming to the universe the death of Christ until He comes. Powerful. Powerful. The transforming of lives. More powerful than you and I can imagine. Don't fall for what the world says about us, but see us. See yourself. See what you're doing as God sees. God can and will do great things with small numbers or large numbers. He's done it throughout all history, and He continues to do it today. You keep going and doing those small things, the things that look insignificant. You keep going and sending a little card to someone who's sick. Is that powerful? Powerful. Powerful when we do it for God and His glory. Pray for someone. That's weak. It's insane. No, it's powerful. It's earth-shattering stuff that we're involved with. Beyond what we can imagine. Yeah, you keep doing those things that look to the world as insignificant, and you remember it's the power of God working now. Paul says in verse 2, 1 Thessalonians 2:2, he says, "But though we had already suffered and been shamefully treated at Philippi, as you know, we had boldness in our God to declare to you the gospel of God in the midst of much conflict." Where did Paul find his boldness? Where was Paul's boldness found? In God. He was bold in God, confident in God. See, if the truth is that our God is the only God, and He is, and if the truth is that our God is the creator and the sustainer of all things, and He is, then why shouldn't we be bold like Paul? Why shouldn't we be bold like him? Not bold in our ability to speak well, to convert people by our nice speech, but bold in our God. Bold in Him. Even though Paul was mistreated in Philippi, he was still bold in preaching in Thessalonica because he had confidence in God, not in himself or in his circumstances. He was bold in God as the source of all life and as the all-powerful one. Paul was living for God and was able to have that boldness. But he also had boldness in the gospel, which is God's good news. I don't have confidence in myself, but in God's gospel, Paul would say, I have boldness in the God-giving good news. See, the gospel is powerful and true. It's the message that changes lives, isn't it? Does the gospel change lives? Yes. The gospel of Jesus takes a prostitute and makes her pure. Praise God. Ain't that good news? The gospel of Jesus Christ takes a drunkard and a drug dealer and a nobody and makes them new. Is that good? Is that powerful? The gospel takes a sinner. Listen, the gospel takes a sinner and makes him a saint. Isn't that good news? Is that powerful? You want a miracle? You want a miracle? People all want miracles today. You want to know what one of the biggest, most powerful miracles is? When God takes a sinner and makes him a saint. There. And we see miracles all the time as people are immersed into the death, the burial, and the resurrection of Jesus. Ain't that true? We're different. You're different. I'm different. And there's hope for this world. There's hope in this world because of the gospel. Because of the message that's foolishness. A crucified carpenter. But it's the power of God to change things. Paul never compromised or changed the good news. Paul wasn't ashamed of the gospel, even though when he preached, it brought down all kinds of worldly hatred and trouble for him, didn't it? A lot of times he was in all kinds of problems. But look at what he says in Romans 1, 16 through 17. He says, For I am not ashamed of the gospel, for it is the power of God for salvation to everyone who believes, to the Jew first and also the Greek. For in it, the righteousness of God is revealed from faith for faith, as it is written, the righteous shall live by faith. The gospel is the power of God to change lives. Paul was bold in God. He was bold in the preaching of the gospel. He saw in the proclamation of the death, the burial, and the resurrection of Christ the power of God at work. So no, His coming was not in vain. Regardless of what it looked like, regardless of how many people followed, regardless of how many people were converted. And there was only a small group that was converted. But it was powerful. When you seek to please God by living according to His Word and proclaiming the gospel, you and I will be hated. You're going to find yourself hated. Find yourselves in all kinds of worldly sufferings. Listen, when you come to Christ, when you proclaim Christ, when you live for Christ, you may lose family members. They may not like you. You may lose friends. They may not like you. They may tell you to stop talking about Jesus. They may not want to be around you. But you keep living for Jesus. You keep preaching Christ by what you say and what you do. and you remember that your preaching and your living out the gospel is the very power of God to change lives, your lives, their lives. We don't know what God's doing, but we know God is working powerfully. It's not your job to change it. It's not my job to change it and make it more palatable. God knows what He's doing. We're simply messengers. What's your motivation in life? What are you motivated by? What are we motivated by? We're motivated to please God rather than people, aren't we? We're motivated to please God rather than people, aren't we? Now, let me ask again. We're motivated to please God rather than men, aren't we? Yes, we are. I know you are. It's okay, you can speak. I'm from Mass. I don't know. You can talk back a little. I'm fine. Yes, we're motivated to please God rather than men. I know that's what you want to do. I know that's what you want to do. Keep proclaiming the gospel in word and deed. You keep doing that. You keep your eyes on Jesus, and God will take care of the rest. And you and I can be assured of one thing. When we live for Christ, when we do those small little things that look insignificant, you and I can be assured of one thing. What is that? That it's the power of God. And He's doing great and mighty things. God bless you as you continue to preach Christ crucified and raised from the dead. You keep doing that. Keep doing it. Keep doing it. Let's pray together.